Greetings and welcome to the Dangerous Gentleman podcast. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Why do I do this? Before I answer that question, I want to ask that if you like anything that I'm doing, I want you to click the like button, click the thumbs up, shoot me a comment down below, check out my social media links, share it with your friends, do all the things. So why do I do this? Why do I have a podcast? Why is me doing this worth my time or your time to listen to? Well, let me start with how I got here. For the first several years of my life, first several decades of my life, I thought it was pretty boring. I grew up in a solid home, went to church, did all the things, right? Nothing too crazy, nothing too exciting. And I would hear other people's stories and I thought, that's interesting. That's crazy. That is the power of God working in other people's lives. And I thought my story was pretty boring. And then as I've shared over the course of the last several months, some pretty interesting things started to happen to me. And I started to look back at the course of the rest of my life and realize that it was all leading up to this point, that it was all setting all this up. And I realized that I actually had a fairly powerful story. But it wasn't me thinking that I had a powerful story that made me want to share it. It was the idea that when I started to share my story with other people, that they told me that my story was important, that my story was inspiring. They would tell me, my son needs to hear that. My husband needs to hear that. Or I needed to hear that today because I needed to know that I'm not alone. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm telling my story. At first, I thought I was going to write a book, and then the whole idea of a book seemed way too intimidating for me. And then I realized that I walk around all the time telling my story to myself, sometimes out loud. I walk a lot. And so I would have these conversations with myself, or oftentimes I would imagine, now don't go thinking I'm schizophrenic. I'm not crazy. The person wasn't actually there. But I would be imagining myself telling my story or a piece of my story to a person, to a specific person, and I would cater the story to them. And so I learned how to tell my story very well, and I did it a lot. Sometimes I was telling my story to God. Sometimes I was telling my story to my kids. Sometimes I'm telling it to my mom or my dad or my cousin or this person or that person. So I learned how to refine my story. And then I just realized, hey, rather than writing a book or starting some big fancy podcast, why don't I just talk into a microphone? And so the first several episodes of this podcast was me just walking around talking into a microphone. And then I hired an editor, and she started to make it sound better. And then she's like, why don't you just do video? You can do video too. I thought it was intimidating. I had to have a camera. She's like, no. Here's how you do it. So then I started to do this. I started to put the podcast out on video. And for those who are listening on audio, I think you get what I'm saying. So why do I do this? Number one, I believe that stories are important. Okay? Why are stories important? Well, our stories, each one of us, our story is a gift from God. God orchestrated our lives and He put certain things in motion to weave the tapestry of all these other things, millions and billions of different factors of the way that things could go, and He orchestrated our lives to go a certain way to create a certain story. So they are a gift. And when we realize that they are a gift from God, and that gift is to help us to learn something and to grow, right? Then we appreciate our story. The other reason stories are important is everybody has one. Regardless of who you are, or where you grew up, or who your parents are, or whatever it is, you have a story to tell. And you may think it's boring like I did, right? But it's not. It's your story. Your story is what got you to where you are, and your story is all the pieces. It's what makes your life worth living. So learn how to tell it, and learn how to tell it well, and learn how to look at whatever circumstances it is and to grow from it and to become a better person based on your story. Don't regret it. Don't neglect it. Don't compare it, right? Because our stories are how we learn. Throughout the course of history is just a long series of several thousand years of stories being told. Yeah, there's works of nonfiction in there, but the great works of history, the great lessons throughout time, the books, most of them are stories. So we learn about our past. That's how we learn lessons for the future and where not to go. The last thing I want to say about stories is that no one's story is better or worse. Your story is just your story. So when I used to sit in those NA meetings and I would tell my story, and then I would compare it to someone else's story, I'd be like, wow, their story is so much worse than mine. Or, wow, their story is so much better than mine. Or whatever it was. I used to judge people for their story. I used to do a lot of comparison of stories, and then I realized there's a certain amount of our story that we have some level of choice in the matter. But a lot of what happens to us is orchestrated ahead of time by God, right? And He knows the choices and the decisions that we're going to make ahead of time, and He sets things in motion. And we can change that to a certain extent, but a lot of it, choices and decisions. There's this fine balance between the choices and the decisions that we make and God's will and God's ultimate plan for our lives and His plan for our lives. Okay. So stories are important. Number 2, I realized over the course of time, as I told my story, at first I thought, I'm the only one that's lived a life like this. I'm the only one that's been down this path. I'm the only one. Well, I'm not. I am not alone. I would sit in those meetings and I would hear people tell these crazy stories of things that happened to them. And I'm like, wow, that sounds like something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. Or that sounds like something that happened to me when I was a kid. Or that's how my dad acted. Or that's how my mom was. Or that's what my ex-wife did to me or my best friend or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm not the only one that struggles like this. And then they would share some of their inner conversation. And I'd be like, holy shit, they think just like I did. And I realized that I am not alone. Neither are you. And so as I would share my story with people, people started to come up and say the same thing to me. Like, you used to think that? That's the road that you went down? Wow, I've been down that same road. Or I've had that same train of thought. Or that's so similar. Like, I thought that I was the only one that thought that way. So first I realized that I wasn't alone. The other thing is that I want you to realize that you're not alone. Because there's someone else out there who has a story that is at least similar enough to yours that you can relate to them and you can maybe learn and grow from them. I'm not alone, and neither are you. And in case you're wondering, this is important enough to me that I have some notes written, so I may glance down here every once in a while. So the other reason, and I've hinted at this before, is that, like I talked about before, my life was here, and it crashed down to the bottom, and now it's working its way up. And that's not anything special about me, right? Based on my story, based on what you have heard and will hear about me, there's nothing too crazy special about me. I wasn't born genetically better or inferior or superior or with more willpower or more discipline or more of any of these things than anybody else. There's nothing in my DNA that says that I am more capable of changing my life than anybody else. And there's nothing different about your DNA either. Who you are inside, there's nothing in there that says that you can't change your life. There's nothing in there that says that you can't redefine your identity. Because your DNA and your identity are not the same thing. Right? Like I was the fat, lazy pervert. Was I born that way? Nope. Do I have to live that way? Nope. Did I become those things in some ways? Yes. But it wasn't anything about how I was born. It wasn't biological. It wasn't set in stone in my brain or in my DNA or anything like that. It built up over time. And so then over time, I was able to reverse much of that. And so there's nothing special about me. I just started making a series of choices and decisions and taking myself through a process to change and redefine myself. And so the reason I tell my story and the reason I share some of these lessons that I have is to show you that if I can do it, if I can change my life in these ways using a process over time, that if I can do it, then there's no reason that you can't do it too. Your path is going to be a little bit different than mine, but there's some basics that we all kind of got to come to grips with. The process is, and the way I like to put it is, the process is simple, but it's not easy. You may wonder what that means. Well, what I mean by that is running a marathon is simple. It's putting one foot in front of the other for 26.2 miles. It's not complicated, but it's not easy either. Because putting one foot in front of the other for 26.2 miles, that's a lot of steps. It's a lot of one foot in front of the others. And so is changing your life. Changing your life is day after day, one step in front of the other. It's simple. Anybody can do it. Take the steps. That's why I do this. One, stories are important. We all have one. We need to share them. We need to learn from them. We need to grow from them, right? We are not alone. I'm not alone. You're not alone. So we need to share these things with people. If we never talk, if we never say these things, if we never share these things, we're going to think that we're alone. But we start to shed light on things. And we're going to realize that there's other people out there that maybe they're not just like us, but they're a lot like us. And if we never share those stories with people, we're never going to realize that there's other people out there like this and that maybe they've learned a lesson that could benefit me. So share your story. And that's why I share mine. And again, if I can do it, as I share my story, you realize and you learn some of the things that I talk about. If I can change it, then you can too. So that's why I do this, right? The reason I started this is to share my story, not to hear myself talk, but so that I can hopefully inspire some people, hopefully help make some people's lives better. That's why. That's why I do it. And so once again, I'm going to ask that if you liked this, if you like anything that I have to say, give it a like, give it a follow, give it a share, check out my social media links, and a little sneak preview. I got some cool stuff coming up around the first of the year that if you follow me, you're going to be able to get in on it sooner than other people. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be dropping in the next couple of weeks. So we will talk to you later.
So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.